Well, I'm very excited to be here. If you've never been to a Veritas debate before, welcome. We're very glad to have you. The format is going to be a little bit different than debates you've maybe seen in the past. We encourage no clapping, but we do want an engaged crowd, so we encourage snapping and stomping to show approval. And then if you really don't like something someone says, you can hiss at them. Thank you. As far as the structure of the debate goes, we're going to have 6-minute opening speeches from each of our 4 presenters, followed by a question from the audience. We're then going to move into an open floor period where anyone from the audience can stand, raise their hand, and give a 5-minute speech, followed by a question from the audience. We're then going to have a 3-minute comment from a presenter from each side. This will be followed by a 2-minute lightning round where anyone from the crowd can stand, raise their hand, and give a 2-minute speech. No questions. And then we're going to conclude the debate with a 3-minute speech from a presenter from each side. After that, we're going to have a vote, and you're going to vote on which side presented their arguments more convincingly. So just keep that in mind while you're listening to the speeches, that you're going to be voting on which side presented their arguments more convincingly at the end. I'd like to encourage everyone, especially if you've never been to a Veritas debate before, to really think about the arguments being presented and think if you have anything to say, whether it be a question or a speech. We want to hear your thoughts. And the motion for tonight is, this House believes that billionaires should be allowed to exist. Little clarification, that's $1 billion US, not Venezuelan bolivar. Affirming the motion tonight will be a senior business accounting major, Mr. Matt Hennig.
Yeah.
Joining him will be a freshman theology and philosophy major, Mr. Paul Carl Ward. Opposing the motion tonight will be a graduate theology student, Mr. Alex Denley. And joining him will be a freshman philosophy and classics major, Mr. Henry Sanders. And then if you would like to become a Veritas associate or be added to the group chat where we announce our events, head over to Magdalena and McKenna in the back. And my name is Peter Sammons, and I'll be the chairman for tonight. And please rise for the prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
St. Thomas Aquinas,
pray for us.
St. Francis,
pray for us.
In the Father, and the Son. All right, we will start with an opening speech from the affirming side, Mr. Matt Hennig.
Testing. Good evening. I want to start my debate by clarifying what I believe. I'm not arguing for the existence of billionaires. I'm not saying they're necessarily a good thing. But I am arguing that we can't say billionaires aren't allowed to exist. And the reason why is because I base my teachings on the Catholic Church. Right? Everything the Catholic Church has said all throughout history, from the scriptures to the encyclicals of today, is that wealth is okay. She's always clarified that it's fine to have wealth, so long as you use your wealth in a proper sense, which is giving what is excess according to your state in life. And that's very important to recognize. Excess according to your state in life. And I'll delve on that in a bit. But throughout all of her documents, she is focused on one major theme. She is called for wise wealth. She's called for those who have wealth to be wise with it. And this has been shown even in Pope Francis, including Leo XIII, in his encyclical Rerum Novarum. And that's probably something you're going to hear from a lot tonight. Now, in Rare Navarra, Pope Leo XIII bases his arguments upon the idea that there is a difference between the right to possess money and the right to spend money as you will. Now, that's a direct quote from Leo XIII. And what he means by that is that because of private property, as St. Thomas Aquinas argues, we have a right to possess everything that we acquire justly, right? Because of original sin, and that we're called to be good stewards of the earth, in order to care for the earth properly, we're going to be more acquainted to caring for things that we have something we can call our own. Now, if you have a general idea of this is everybody's and we all should care for it, no one's actually going to care for it. Okay? That's human nature. Well, with private property, we will care for it. We will actually see to care for something that we call our own. So that can actually be extended to any amount of wealth. And there's a reason why the church, the saints, and the scriptures hasn't put a limit on what private property entails, what just private property actually is. Now, the Pope goes on to say that there's no reasonable means to take away private property that we deem to be too much. That there's some people that have too much and it needs to be given to others, right? And the two means that we can feasibly do this from, which is, in policy, is either mob rule, a bunch of people coming and taking away someone else's private property that they justly acquired, which is just stealing in a big group, and the state. Now the state could do that might be an argument, but the Pope actually argues against this in Rare Navarra, and through the Catechism now. He says that the state has no right to ensure that the rich are giving what is excess from their state in life. He says that directly. And the reason why is because the state has a certain set of duties. And there's three duties that the Pope drives us down to, the church drives us down to care for its people, the rich, including the poor especially, to right injustices, and to levy just taxes. Now, in caring for its people, it doesn't say just care for the poor, just make sure that they're fine, right? It says care for the poor especially because they don't have as much of a means to care for themselves, but also care for the rich. And care for the rich, ensuring that they have their private property which they justly acquire. Now, it's levying just taxes, which is ensuring that people give what is okay, as our Lord said in scriptures. And it's fine if the rich give more. They have more. It's okay for them to give more. It's fine that 10% of people in this country give 90% of the taxes. Because one of those people has more money than any of us will ever be able to pay in taxes. And then righting injustices. Now, you might say, as a counter-argument to this, that it's an injustice that one person has more money than they need in their lifetime, right? But that's not an actual injustice. That's just a perceived injustice. That's just someone's opinion coming in and saying, well, no, that should be someone else's. No, but by injustice, the Pope and the Church means that if they steal their money, if they don't pay just wages, if they don't pay just taxes, that's an injustice. That's okay for the state to step in. Now,
1 minute.
oh shoot. So there could be just billionaires. Essentially, I'm not arguing for people to just spend the money as they were. People like you have they can't just spend the money on Playgirls and Playboy Mansion. That's not okay, because the Pope says in Rare Navarra that there's a difference between spending your money as you want and having the right to possess money. Right? Billionaires, they provide businesses, they provide land, they provide money for charities, and that's good uses of their money. Right? Kings were billionaires, and you have to focus on the state in life. That's what I mentioned earlier. That people's state in life judges what is excess. Right? My state in life is going to be different than a billionaire's, or a king's, or a bachelor's. So a billionaire's money isn't just tied up in a bank in Switzerland somewhere. A billionaire's money is going to be tied up in assets, businesses, charities, land, businesses that provide tens of thousands of people with just wages that provide for their life.
Please conclude.
essentially, there's no Christian way to say that you can take away someone's just money from them just because it's too much, and yeah.
Do we have a question for the presenter? Great.
Yeah, how do you propose someone
You said justly acquired. How do you propose someone justly acquire an amount of money so large that it is only measurable in modern senses of the term?
Well, you can look at kings for that. Like I mentioned, Constantine was an example of a billionaire. He provided just foundations for Christianity and society. The churches he built, the cities he built, the armies he led. And that would just be through. I'm saying if there was a billionaire that didn't acquire his money through stealing, through paying unjust wages, or through not paying taxes, those would be unjust things. But assuming that wasn't it, we can't focus on the hypothetical negative of it. We have to focus on the good of a way a billionaire can come about.
Thank you, Mr. Hennig. An opening speech from the opposing side, Mr. Alex Denley.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm convinced that some billionaire made the motion because it seems as though we're going to line up the billionaires and have them all shot if you say they should not exist, right? It's very communistic. But the question I want to pose is, would a just society have billionaires? Would a just society have billionaires? And to answer that question, we should go to exactly what Mr. Hennig was looking at, the papal encyclicals, Rerum Novarum. And particularly I want to look at three terms: the common good, labor, and ownership. So Rerum Novarum is subtitled On the Duties of Capital and Labor, because what Pope Leo is looking at is that society, in his words, is being transformed more and more into those who own and those who do not own. That laborers are being transformed into wage earners. They don't actually own the production of what they're laboring for, but rather that labor is then being owned by someone else. Right? And this is the idea of the corporation owning someone's labor. You pay them a wage because you make the difference between what they actually produce and what you give them as a wage. And the Pope is lamenting this type of situation and saying this is dismantling the common good. Because the idea is that the billionaire, for example, is acting in his own private interest, accumulating more and more from the labor of those that he employs. And what this leads to is the lack of ownership on the behalf of the laborer. So the common good is being frayed. And so if we move to what is labor, or is the laborer being justly recompensed, he is being paid a wage but not actually owning what he produces. And so the lamentable fact is that we're getting more and more poverty in the face of more and more economic production, because the ownership is being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. Right? And what this ultimately leads to is ownership not actually being possessed by the family. And this is what, 100 years later, John Paul II in Centesimus on is saying as well, is that the family no longer has the ownership it needs to provide for itself. Right? And I think phenomenologically, we can see this in our own experience. Like, we don't own things. You don't own your house, it's mortgaged to you, it's owned by the bank. You don't own your education, it's rented to you by a loan. Right? You don't own movies anymore, you stream them on Netflix or Disney, right? You don't actually own. And so this precarious situation leads to a sociological problem. So today there are 250 men who own the equivalent of 3 billion people in the world today. And Pope Pius XI in Quadragesimo makes the bold claim: billionaires create communists. Create communists, right? If ownership is actually just being concentrated and people aren't owning, then they're just going to be alienated and feeling like, well, I don't own anything. And a political organization comes by and says, hey, we're going to revolt against your slave owners, right? You're going to lose, nothing to lose but your chains, right? And so Pius XI in Quadragesimo is talking about the fact that the just distribution of ownership. And this is what John Paul II will call the universal destination of all goods. That goods are meant to be distributed justly in a society so that people own enough to be able to provide for their family. So, would billionaires exist in a just society? The popes are very clear: no. Because they have isolated their private property for themselves, not aimed towards the common good, but for like sending people to Mars, or whatever other pet project that billionaires want to do, or health control for Bill Gates, that this is working contra the common good. Further, in regards to the laborer, the Pope is lamenting the fact, the popes throughout, Quadrasimanus and Disposanum, they're all lamenting the poor are not being cared for. And they come up with the term, the preferential option for the poor. That when we're looking at our society, the economic apparatus, the poor are the ones that we need to look at to see if we're acting justly. It's not looking at the wealth of the billionaires that makes a just society, it's looking at how are the impoverished being treated. How are the poor being treated in this economic system that's continuing to isolate ownership in the hands of the few? And what the popes are calling for is a reclaiming of labor, of a reclaiming of work. That work is glorious, it is good, it is fulfilling our natures as being co-creators. And in a system that's taking from their labor and not giving them the share of the ownership, that is the problem. So to return to this question, billionaires, would they exist in a just society? No. And I urge you to oppose the motion because billionaires, and Benedict XVI points to this in Caritatis and Veritate when he talks about we're at a point where just government needs to reconceive of itself. It's not the state that protects private property interests, it rather is a government that's looking to aim towards the common good. And this can come about in different ways. It could actually be the government trying to justly distribute the goods. It could be a redefining of tax laws or different ways. Different ways to accomplish this. And, so Mr. Hennig brought up the example of the excess of the wealth, right? The point is, how is that wealth acquired? Were the laborers actually being rewarded for the profits of their labor? That's what the book is talking about. Are the laborers being given? And billionaires exist to show us, no, they're not, right? How do you acquire $1 billion? Maybe you work your swap job 1 million hours, right? You will never be a billionaire. There's not enough time for that. You have to take the excess of the labor of those people you employ and continue to build a bigger and bigger apparatus. And the final point from Aquinas, whose feast day was yesterday, the distinction between natural and artificial wealth. Natural wealth are the things for the body, food and shelter and clothing and all that, the good. Everything added to that's artificial. It's the artificial wealth. We all have artificial wealth. It's meant to be used towards certain goods.
Please conclude.
Billionaires are using that artificial wealth purely for themselves and not for the common good. And so to conclude, I would urge you to oppose the motion. A just society would not have billionaires. And from Psalm 49, man in his riches lacks wisdom. He is like the beasts that are destroyed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hennig. Do we have a question from the audience? Yes, Mr. Williams.
Hey, Alex. Is it your contention that private ownership is always opposed to the common good? And if not, then why does the amount of the private ownership dictate whether or not it's good or bad?
Right. So private ownership is affirmed by Leo XIII and then affirmed by John Paul II in St. Dismas. And John Paul makes it very clear that what Leo is saying is not an absolute private property. A property that's just like, well, this is mine, like a Lockean transcendental. That, oh, I just have property, there's no concern for the common good. Right when John Paul introduces that concept, describing Leo's concept of private property, he's saying the universal common destination of all goods. And billionaires as a class, they don't see, because they're based on a view of the state and a view of private property that's purely their own and they have no concern for the common good, that's the reason why they're continuing to be allowed to exist in our social fabric. And we're in a precarious situation where we're always on the precipice of having the masses be galvanized by a movement of communist revolution. We have 3 billion people that own the equivalent of 250. We're in a really bad economic situation by this conception of private property.
Thank you, Mr. Hennig. Now for our second affirming speech, Mr. Paul Carl Ward.
Thank you. I'd like to start off tonight by saying, if anyone among you owns $1 billion, this is not a threat to anyone else. The personal ownership of any amount of money is not a threat to the common good. For example, I, as a Catholic, made in the image of God, I have a God-given ability to exert my own free will. And how is this free will executed? in my ability to prioritize the choosing of the good and the rejecting of evil in all facets of our life, whether it be purchasing a good at X amount of value or not. I say unto you, if I have made $1 billion through the free market, I am exerting my God-given right for freedom, as we are called to freedom, more so than anyone else. I posit to you, how many among you here own a smartphone? Show of hands. That's what I thought. Would you say Steve Jobs is evil for providing you the ability to own a product which you desire? A product which you chose out of your own free will to purchase? In the same way, if I have a product, let's say I want to sell you something I've made, and I value that at X. You come in and sell and want to buy, let's say you want to buy my jacket at a value greater than X. I, exerting my free will, and you exerting your free will, I have a God-given ability to sell it to you for greater than X. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not a sin to gain profit. It is not a sin to grow wealthy. Rather, I posit to you, whose gallery are we sitting in right now? Not the poor workers of Steubenville. We are sitting in the Gentile family's gallery. Without the Gentile family, we would be outside having this debate. Am I wrong? No. Look at these amazing pieces of art accumulated by the wealthy for your enjoyment. The billionaires of society, rather, I posit you, the millionaires, the people who have $1,000, have chosen out of their own free will to give back. The notion is billionaires should be allowed to exist. I posit to you, you cannot be a Catholic, a Christian even, and say that any group of people, Jew, Gentile, poor, free, Scythian, should not be allowed to exist. Am I wrong? Christ calls, when the rich man approached Christ, Christ saw him and loved him. I posit to you that I, acting in the free market, the only system which inherently preserves the human dignity in all of us, allows us to gain profit. You would say, oh, I would prefer to be in a market where I have no freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, a market where you have no freedom is where you are but a bodily automata in a system that is anti-life. We are called to freedom. And our freedom allows us to gain wealth. Our freedom allows us to grow in material things, in spiritual things. I say the billionaires, although they may have a physically easy life, probably do not have a very good emotional or spiritual life because they are burdened by the world we are in. The billionaires among us contribute the most to our society. I posit this to you. For the past 100 years, the 25 top philanthropists in America, in the Western Hemisphere, in the West in general, have all been billionaires. Warren Buffett, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. When I see the contributions they've given to society, when I see the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and how much they've done for the common education of the American populace, I cannot think but be grateful for the immense amount of money they have not just put into themselves, our computers, our PC laptops, but into the common good. I posit to you, how many of you own goods that you did not make? Show of hands, how many people have bought goods that they did not make themselves? You want to know who made those? You want to know who made your smartphone? Who made your laptop? Who made your car? The billionaires. I'm not saying that innovation is evil or wrong. I'm saying innovation gives you the God-given gift of wealth. Right? Let's look at St. Joseph of Arimathea. Christ would not have a tomb without a billionaire. Let's look at righteous Lot. Righteous Lot. There was no man in the East greater than pious Job. Abraham and Lot were tribe leaders, billionaires of their days. Pious Job, among whom in the East no man was greater. And what does he say when his wealth is taken from him by God? The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. Yet still praise the name of the Lord. And after Job has been tested, what does our loving God do? He restores his wealth not just once, but twice fold. He gives him new sons. He gives him new land, new property. Ladies and gentlemen, I posit to you that this motion, the billionaires should be allowed to exist. You cannot but affirm it. Anyone should be allowed to exist. Look at the Protestant, look at the Muslim, or would you deny them their personhood just because they've accumulated wealth? Look at any marginalized society. Now this doesn't mean that, Steve Jobs, these billionaires, it doesn't matter whether they're not good Catholics, good people, they're not intellectually astute or necessarily moral. That's not the motion at hand tonight. The motion at hand tonight is this House believes that billionaires should be allowed to exist. Because we believe in the inherent dignity of all, everyone should be allowed to exist, billionaires included. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Do we have a question for the presenter? Please stand. Yes, Mr. Grote.
So you mentioned the billionaires make our cars, our laptops, our, phones, but isn't it exploited children in various countries that are making them, not actually the billionaires?
Allow me, if you will, to take you back to 1912, 1919. I am Henry Ford, and I have the idea for a car. I invent the first car, and I employ people to use my invention to make a car. How many of you among here own a Ford car? Raise your hand. See, how many among you own any type of car? Did the worker in the plant invent the idea for that car? No. A billionaire, a wealthy individual, a intellectual designed that, and they used their God-given gift of free will and the ability to think, to grow, to love. They used that, they made this car, and you chose to enter into a contractual agreement wherein you're helping make that car, and I, as a consumer, I don't have to drive a car. Lord knows I want to live out in the woods by myself, apart from society. But no, I drive my gas guzzler Crown Victoria to and from work every day. And I choose to do that. At any moment, I'm free to go back to my cabin in the woods, but I don't.
Please conclude.
Therefore, it is the original makers of these things, these original innovators, who, because of their God-given gift of innovation, have profited off of that. And that is allowed, moral, and a fulfillment of our Dominion mandate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. For our final speech from the opposing side, Mr. Henry Sanders.
Well, I want to start by reminding my opponent, Mr. Ward, that the blessed Apostle Paul said, in fact, that there was no Jew, no Greek, and no Scythian, so then it follows that there's no billionaire either. Well, I want to thank Mr. Sammons for inviting me to debate, and I want to thank you all for coming here tonight. And I want to start by saying to you that, in fact, there are billionaires in our society, and they make it more unjust. Now, in the U.S., there are 975 billionaires, and they, in fact, own 19.7% of the United States GDP. Well, that, in fact, means that the average American billionaire has in his bank account over 18,000 times more U.S. dollars than I made from my swap job last semester. Well, back to the statistics. So that means that less than 1,000 people control almost 20% of the United States GDP. Now this is a giant imbalance between the value of labor and capital, right? These billionaires are not doing 20% of the labor in the United States. That's absurd. They are mostly sitting around on their yachts or in their offices and occasionally maybe inventing something. Oh, where are they? Are they not in their yachts? Okay. Well, okay. So this is clearly an imbalance between labor and capital. Now, I want to follow this up by saying that billionaires clearly do not contribute to the common good. And, right, Mr. Ward said that, right, through their philanthropy, billionaires contribute to the common good, but this is in fact not true. right? Billionaires give a little bit back, but they continue to take a lot away. Right? This is evidenced by the fact that since 2000, billionaires' wealth has increased by over 600%. So, right, billionaires, through their companies, right, they extract unjustly from laborers their wealth, not giving them the just results of their labor. So, right, let's look at this. How do billionaires defraud the laborer? The way this happens is by two means, essentially, right? One is unjust working conditions, and the second one is the lack of a living wage. Let's start with the working conditions, right? So, in companies owned by billionaires, let's take Amazon, for example, right? There's well-substantiated claims that Amazon does not allow its employees to take bathroom breaks during their shifts. Okay, fair enough. Well, there's also claims that Amazon has forced workers to work to exhaustion when they're old or burdened with chronic illnesses. Now, this is a real problem. And then thirdly, it's well documented that many companies like Amazon, Starbucks, and Walmart have fiercely resisted efforts at unionization. Now, you might have heard from so-called conservative politicians that unionization is a problem, but in fact, it's a practice that's been continuously commended by the church since Pope Leo XIII. Right? So, in fact, these companies that push anti-union propaganda on their employees are just blatantly defying the teaching of the church. And then finally, it's worth pointing out, like Alex said earlier, that billionaires create communism. Without the wealth of billionaires and their companies flooding into communist countries like China and Vietnam, those countries would not be able to continue to function economically. Right? The only reason that communism is able to function is because billionaires allow their wealth to go to those countries, because they know that those countries' unjust laws will enable them, the billionaires, to exploit workers in that country. And then finally, I want to point out that billionaires, in fact, do not contribute to a just distribution of wealth. And the first point I want to make is that billionaires actually do not pay their fair share of taxes, right? You mentioned this statistic, which is somewhat dubious, that the wealthy pay most of the taxes, and that's actually true. But believe it or not, most billionaires pay less taxes than the average American. And it's been documented that between 2010 and 2020, Jeff Bezos paid less than a 1% tax rate. And in fact, he's in a tax bracket where he ought to be paying 37% at least. So I want to conclude by actually rebutting one of Mr. Hennig's points, and that's that Constantine was a just billionaire. I don't know if any of you guys have read Roman history, but even though Constantine is a saint, he definitely did a lot of unjust stuff. Plus, he was an Aryan, which isn't great. Yeah, moving on. Yeah, Eusebius was an Aryan. Okay, Byzantine history discourse ended. I want to point out that billionaires, what they're doing is really scary, because what they're saying to us is that, all right, well, what they're saying to us is that we have to continue to allow their wealth to continue to grow, whereas our wages stay static, right? It's been documented that since 1971, the wages of the average worker have completely stagnated, whereas what I said earlier is that billionaires' wealth since 2000 has increased by 600%. This is clearly the result of an economic system that has been created by and in order to benefit the ultra-wealthy. They've gamed the system, and we as Catholics and as upstanding citizens shouldn't stand for it. Finally, I want to address every conservative's favorite billionaire, and that's Elon Musk, right? So, the problem with Elon Musk is that he owns an electric car company, and creating electric cars is involved in lots of injustices, right? Including the mining of lithium and other rare earth minerals in China to create electric car batteries. And this involves, right, the refining of metal from giant mines, and also the continuous exploitation of workers in communist countries, like I was saying earlier. So I want to urge you to vote against the motion, billionaires should not be allowed to exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Do we have a question for the presenter? Yes, Ms. Serla.
Okay, so I'd like to ask you about, you said work conditions. So I personally know someone who has worked at Amazon and who's worked moving boxes, and it was a, job that required physical strength. But it was a much needed job at the time, and they benefited greatly from it, and they were not like abused in the workplace. So I was wondering why you think that all Amazon, well, not all, but many of the Amazon workers are, from just rumors, all of them are mistreated, and how these jobs are really hurting people who need jobs.
Well, yeah, firstly, I wouldn't call it rumors, right? There's been extensive investigative journalism into Amazon's treatments of its workers, so I think to call it rumors is to sort of denigrate the reporting a little bit. And then to address your claim about your friend, right? I'm sure there's many people who have benefited from working at Amazon, but firstly, that has nothing to do with the fact that Jeff Bezos is a billionaire, right? I mean, Jeff Bezos is still profiting from his company regardless of whether your friend works there or not. And then secondly, I think, right, no one's claiming that people can't derive good from working for billionaires in some circumstances, so I don't really see the relevance of the question. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sammons. All right, we're now going to move into our open floor session where anyone can stand, raise their hand, and give a 5-minute speech. So please stand if you would like to speak. Everyone, if you're called upon, please state your name. Mr. Prendergast.
Thank you, Mr. Sammons. Just regarding the motion, I do think it would be very hard for us to affirm. And my concern is not really even ontologically like billionaires, but I do want to address. So I'll say I would affirm the motion because I think there's a problem with implementing any sort of confiscation and moral and practical problems. But I will say about billionaires contributing to the common good, they can. The wealthy certainly can contribute to the common good, public works, building of churches, beautiful art. But I wouldn't say that the wealthy or billionaires are contributing to the common good in a very significant sense that they are damaging the common good. Paul over here mentioned some foundations, and while, like I said, in theory and ontologically, philanthropy can be a great thing, I think we need to get away from just in general, like on the right, the sort of public or government bad, private always good, nothing, because these billionaires, the Gateses, the Buffetts, you name them, are promoting, they use their wealth to promote, and again, it's not the wealth itself necessarily, it's that they're using it to promote wicked things, population control, whatever, abortion, whatever sort of Davos agenda you can think of. And so I think, I don't have the answer. I think it's a hard question. What do we do about that? Do people have the right to spend their money to do things like that? I don't think so. I don't think you have the right to donate to fund these evil organizations like Planned Parenthood or World Economic Forum or whatever you want to say. And so I do think we have to get away from a sort of libertarian absolutism where you can just do whatever you want. But I also I think we do have to be careful not to, as Aristotle, the philosopher, says, we have to pay attention to the golden mean. And so I think while we do have to affirm this motion in the sense that, the billionaires should not be annihilated per se, we do have to think about whether just because these people are private citizens, whether, big tech oligarchs or, these hedge fund BlackRock people can control our society and whether we have a say in that, or whether just because they're not, private public and they're like private quote unquote citizens that we just have to acquiesce because of some sort of, liberal, you can do what you want as long as the state's not interfering. So I guess I'll just warn against that, while still urging affirmation of the motion, just, watch out for the billionaires, I guess.
Do we have a question for the Yeah, Mr. Sanders.
So it seems to me like you're saying that all billionaires are bad in theory, or rather they're bad in reality, but they're good in theory. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't say all are bad necessarily in reality. I mean,
who's a good one?
It's hard to think of a good one because I don't know every single billionaire. So like, I mean, some of them do better things than others. I mean, Elon Musk, for example. But then he also does some transhumanist weird stuff. So I don't really necessarily think we should get all on board with that. And so I do think, in theory, I don't think billionaires are necessarily a bad thing. I mean, they can be. It's hard because it's not like the $1 billion amount necessarily per se that would make them bad. It's like we've kind of been saying, how we use that and how they're relating to society and to others with that amount. And so I would say, yeah, my rail is against our specific, oligarchic tech bro rulers in the billionaire class. And that's the thing. You kind of have to balance, how it's not ontologically bad with how we have, these kind of people and see what we can do about that.
Thank you, Mr. Prendergast. All right, another open floor speech. Yeah, right here in the back. Please state your name.
I'm Catherine Tripolis.
Here.
Something I want to talk about for a minute is just the idea that I think we're sort of ignoring what a billionaire is and what it means to be a billionaire, because I think we need to make a really clear distinction between the idea of a billionaire being someone who has a lot of property or gold or inherited cultural goods in their name versus somebody who owns money. And so I think on both sides, the figure of Constantine the Great has been mentioned as someone who is a billionaire. Now, I'm not exactly sure if he would have actually been a billionaire. I think it would be impossible for us to figure that out, but he certainly owned a lot of wealth as the Roman emperor. But I think one of the things that's really important to remember is that Constantine's wealth wasn't self-accumulated. Most of that wealth belonged to Constantius, his father, and his father before that, and all of the emperors before that. Well, I don't doubt that there was some capital generated by his period as emperor. It wasn't inherently earned by him and his business upstart or his, his economic maneuverings, of which I know very little. That being said, I want to bring that up because being a billionaire in the ancient world, or maybe even just the pre-industrial world, means something very different than I think it does now after the Industrial Revolution. And while I certainly don't believe that we have the right to line up billionaires and kill them, I think it's really important to keep in mind that I do not believe that there's any ethical way to be a billionaire in the post-industrial world that exists currently. As we move away from a more agrarian lifestyle and into an industrial world where we become far more separated from the process of working and making our own goods, I think it's really easy to lose sight of an original model of economics that we had at one time that was by no means perfect. But when we look at the Industrial Revolution and the exploitation and the settling that had to occur immediately after factories became the major way that goods were produced, I think we see a struggle for people to readjust to a reality where they're no longer as directly involved in the making and the producing of their own goods, which goes back to the topic that people seem to be discussing a lot about workers and workers' rights and what's owed to workers. And the problem is, it's easy for us to have a conversation like this in our world, in our post-industrial world now, because we are so far removed from this process. And I think billionaires suffer from the same thing. We all suffer from it because we live in a post-industrial world, in a capitalistic post-industrial world. Not that that's inherently a bad thing, but it is a fact about our reality. And I would argue that these people, there is no ethical way to run factories ethically, to gain so much capital in a way that allows you to acquire billions while also keeping every subsidized level of your capital fair and in that sense, just. Now, I don't necessarily think there's any remedy for this. I unfortunately think that we are almost, we've dug our own grave in the West too far to really reverse anything or change anything in a meaningful way as far as the state goes. The state is sort of become an absolute that's marching down its own path of progress that I tragically feel we have very little control over as far as culture wars go and stuff. But as far as for whether or not we should, as Catholics, who have always sort of opposed ourselves to the times and to the progress of culture, whatever that means, I think it's really important for us
1 minute.
to be critical of the idea that, yes, we shouldn't be out here killing rich people, but that is a communistic idea, but we really need to be very critical of the rich and exactly how they obtained their money. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think, we're so obsessed with defending freedom, which is a very worthy cause, that it sometimes causes us to lose sight of every step of the process in the grand scheme of things. And while I think it's extremely important for us to continue to have private property, we need to be extremely critical of those who amass large amounts of it, because I do believe that amount factors in when we're considering, the means through which people obtain things.
Thank you. Do you have a question for the speaker? Yes, Mr. Williams.
I completely agree with you, and I believe they agree with you, but if these means are justly obtained, then why should amount matter? Why should amount factor into why it's good or bad?
Well, to be totally honest with you, I just think that's impossible. I don't think there's any possible way that you could amass that much money in just one. I'm sorry?
No back and forth. Thank you. All right, another open floor speech. Yes, in white shirt. Please state your name. Can you get the mic?
Victor Krim. So, I'd like to affirm that billionaires should be allowed to exist. I think that the whole society which we have at this point has been built upon capitalism. He said that billionaires don't contribute anything to society. While she said that their assets aren't necessarily completely financial. I think that what they have in the stock system is a large amount of their wealth, and without a capitalist system, all the crux of this matter is socialism versus capitalism and how wealth is distributed. There should be capitalists that own a lot so that there is some value to money still. Like, if there is a person that makes $15 an hour in one state and stuff costs less, but in the next state, the person can make $20 an hour, but stuff costs more, it all balances out. There has to be more wealthy people for money to have intrinsic value.
Thank you. Do we have a question for the presenter? Yes, back there.
Yes. In what state are you aware of that the minimum wage corresponds with the price of goods?
So minimum wage doesn't necessarily correspond with the price of goods, but the idea of minimum wage is to have someone make enough money at one or multiple jobs by working hard. The American dream being you're able to work harder and get farther, right? So if you make this much money doing this, you're able to live and then above and beyond that.
Thank you. All right, do we have another open floor speech? Yes, great.
Here, here.
Hi. I go by Thursday. My real name is Josiah. I hope everybody's doing great tonight. The first thing I want to start out is it's Mr. Hennig, right?
Paul Carlwood.
Paul Carlwood? You're Hennig? Cool. So you said that Jesus saw the rich man and he loved him. The very next thing that happens in that passage is the rich man asks Jesus what he must do to be saved. Do you know what he says? He says, give away everything you have to the poor. Are you hissing? Okay, well that's an interesting thing to hiss at. But the other thing is that the church has never, once, ever, the church has never recognized the right to private property as absolute. That is in Sentences Musanis, that is John Paul II. John Paul II says that. And so, where John Paul II says this is that he is deriving the right to private property out of the natural state where goods are shared amongst everyone. This is the common destination of all goods. And he says that a man derives the right to private property when he forms the property in his image by working on it as God forms man in his image. And that he only continues to own this property justly so long as he owns it for the common good. So if a man ceases to use his property for the common good, John Paul II says, this is in the encyclical, that he no longer has a right to it. Therefore, the question, should billionaires be allowed to exist? Well, it seems quite obvious. If a man owns an amount of money where it is not possible that he do a corresponding amount of good to the amount of property he owns, then it is completely impossible for him to justly exist with this amount of property. Now, the natural response to this is going to be that, well, you don't know that they can't. So I would like to piggyback off of what the lady said earlier, that we have to define billionaire. And we can't define billionaire as some like correspondence in the history of the post-industrial era's monarchs. This is not the case. The monarchs didn't have fungible money. The monarchs didn't have the ability to buy property millions of miles away. The monarchs didn't have the ability to employ hundreds of thousands of people at minimum below living wages in separate continents. Sorry, the minimum wage thing threw me off. Also, yeah. This is the idea that a billionaire, that we don't know what the word billionaire means is not the case. We all know what the word billionaire means. It's someone who owns $1 billion and runs these multiple companies. So, I just wanted to be very clear that I don't think that we can call them the monarchs billionaires. It doesn't seem to make sense. And also, their state in life, you have to own money for your state. He said it was to own for the state in life. What billionaire today is running a Christian empire and their state in life corresponds to that amount of money? None of them.
Thank you. Do we have a question for the speaker? All right. Do we have another open floor speech? Mr. Lemansky.
Hello, my name is Nate Lemansky. Boy, have we heard some really cool speeches tonight. Mr. Hennig did a full regurgitation of not one, not two, but I think 3 different papal encyclicals. And then Alex Denley turned around and regurgitated the same papal encyclicals in a dashing back and forth. And then Paul Ward gave an impassioned speech of such masterful rhetoric that it would make Socrates blush and stutter for lots of words. And then Mr. Sanders gave a very statistical speech that had all of the efficiency and mechanistic ruthlessness of a Reddit thread. We heard some really great things here tonight. I am here to effortlessly, seamlessly, and irrefutably synthesize both positions and amend the statement by the addition of one single word. If. Billionaires should be allowed to exist if. The qualifier, the nuance, the criteria. Billionaires should be allowed to exist if they do cool stuff with their money. That's my argument. And by the way, the whole billionaire term is a red herring. It doesn't matter. There's no magical threshold where like, I have just $1 less than $1 billion. I'm good. I'm saved. Oh no, I just got $1. I'm a billionaire. Time to crumple up $1 and throw it in the river. No, what we're really thinking of here is the inordinately wealthy. The people who have wealth beyond what they need to sustain themselves and their family for generations upon generations upon generations, etc., etc. Billionaires should be allowed to exist if they do cool stuff with their money, essentially. Every time I see, the newest, plan of Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos about some transhumanist, neo-techno, hellscape creating bowl, it makes me want to throw up in my mouth. It's disgusting. I don't want to see that. Now, on the other hand, if the inordinately wealthy do cool things like sponsor great artists, thinking of the Renaissance, thinking of Constantine, if the example, but okay. If you tear down ugly buildings, especially churches, and erect new cathedrals in their places, that's pretty cool. Start with CTK Chapel, please. Now, you may wonder, or you may be thinking, wow, this is such a subjective line of reasoning. Who could possibly determine whether billionaires are doing cool stuff or not with their money? And I answer that that's simply a lame response. Because if we subscribe to the principles of the church, it should be pretty clear to see whether or not people with money are contributing to the common good or not. I'll volunteer to be the judge if that puts your mind at ease. Yeah, that's more or less it.
Thank you, Mr. Levinsky. We have a question. Yes, Mr. Sanders.
So you mentioned billionaires erecting churches. One recent billionaire who's sort of been known for his erection of new churches is Vladimir Putin. Are you a fan of that?
I'm a fan of churches.
We have another open floor speech. Mr. Vanderveer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Vanderveer. And I would like to point out a little something that it seems like no one else has discovered. It seems as though the affirming side has insinuated multiple times that billionaires would be excellent people if they would do cool things with their money. At which point I would like to reply to them that they would no longer be billionaires. I say it again, if billionaires actually did cool things with their money, they would no longer be billionaires. The question has come up multiple times. So, what is it with the amount? So if in principle, you can own private property, then does the amount change? So if you own more private property, is that a problem? I think we're missing the point here. Amount is actually key. If you own enough private property, the private property does not remain, quote-unquote, private property any longer. The reason for this is that if I own a substantial portion of the United States, I am no longer a private citizen. I am essentially becoming my own entity. I am becoming my own sort of a government. That's what these cosmopolitans, these multi-billionaires, these people who, like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, all these people, they are just essentially a new nation that doesn't actually have a soil. It doesn't have soil, it doesn't have any ground. These are no longer private citizens. These people, okay, I'll give you an example. When Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all these places conspired to kick Donald Trump off of their platforms, conservatives were outraged. Why were they outraged? Were they outraged because these private companies were using their private businesses to kick a private citizen off of their webpage? No, they claimed that this was now a public good. Facebook was a public good. I would like to say the same thing with regard to these people's enormous assets. They are functioning as public goods. Thank you.
I have a question for the speaker. Elon Musk has around $108 billion. Couldn't he do some pretty cool things with $179 billion and still be a billionaire?
Very good point. I would like to refer to what was said earlier about billionaires being subject. Okay, so he spends $107 billion. Billionaires, in the way that it is being used, refers to a group of people who have enormous influence over society. It doesn't necessarily refer to a dollar amount. Like we were saying earlier, $1 doesn't make the difference between a billionaire and a non-billionaire. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hennig. We have another speech. Mr. Owen.
Okay, so a lot of really interesting speeches have been made tonight, and yeah, I'm really enjoying this. But I would like to say a few things. So I'd like to first say, which I think this is kind of a given, I don't know if anyone would directly dispute this, but I'd like to say God does not condemn wealth. God does not condemn enormous, astronomical wealth. I'd like to give the instance of Solomon. Alright? So Solomon, God told him to ask for anything he could get. So he asked for wisdom. Alright? He didn't ask for wealth. Right? He asked for wisdom. So God gave him more wealth than anyone had ever had. If that's not equivalent to today's billionaires, I don't know what is, okay? Maybe not in the technical terms, but it's so much wealth. God does not condemn wealth. God condones wealth in that instance. So Solomon had, so much wealth, and he also had wisdom. So I like to put that out there. Then next I like to say, so this mostly says, believes that billionaires should not be allowed to exist. It doesn't say a specific billionaire. It doesn't even say the billionaires of today. It just says billionaires. Okay? And I'd like to say just a few things. I'm a little bit scattered, but Okay, so first of all, I'd like to say that money is not an end. Money is not an end in and of itself. Money is a means, right? Means are not evil, okay? It's like a hammer, No matter how many hammers you have, the hammers aren't going to turn evil, Whatever. Okay. So money is a means in and of itself. So right, it's what we do with the money and how we acquire the money that really matters on whether it's evil for us to possess that money. Okay? And I like to say how we acquire the money. So I don't think, show you a billionaire today who has acquired all of his money honestly. He's never done a dishonest deed to get more money. I don't think I could show you one. Alright, well, but we're not talking about billionaires like these billionaires. Even in theory, and I've heard a lot of people say, well, even in theory you can't acquire that much wealth honestly. Well, again, Solomon, I know he wasn't a billionaire today, but he did acquire his wealth honestly, directly from God. And then I also like to say, people say, billionaires don't really do their share of contributing to the common good. People also say, wage slaves or whatever, evil. So I'd like to talk quickly about, the wage earners or whatever. And they're they don't possess the capital that they're putting out. They don't have any share, they don't have any ownership in that. I say no. They are the capital. So you're in McDonald's, you're flipping burgers, you're like, geez, I don't own these burgers. I can't say, oh, I don't want to flip burgers, I want to flip hot dogs. You can't say that, right? So you go home and you're thinking oh my gosh, I just realized a way better idea to flip burgers, okay? That's an amazing idea, this machine or whatever. So you go, you invent that, and then, you start your own fast food chain with these amazing burgers that you figured out how to flip. And you can become a billionaire. Okay? So I just like to say, people not owning any share in what they, no. They can, they are the share. And I'd also like to say, oh my gosh, I just got another point. Billionaires, evil, someone remind me. Okay, well, anyway. Oh yes, billionaires are contributing to the common good. So listen, okay? Billionaires, we need them. We can't have the government, rely on the government or whatever for everything. Billionaires, like if there's a disease or some new invention, I'm really like, oh, the money's so useless and blah, blah, blah. Well, I mean, it's not necessarily useless. It could be useful, but it's not something that you would want the government to do. That's just a waste of our taxes. That's a waste of the government's money. That's why we need a private owned person to do these things for us, okay? So, billionaires, and again, not all the billionaires today are good. I know, not all of them contribute to the Commonwealth.
Please conclude.
But, right, I think in theory billionaires could, and in theory billionaires can exist without being killed. Okay.
Thank you. Do we have a question? Yes, Mr. Van der Veer.
So aren't billionaires today, you mentioned wealth as a means to an end. Aren't billionaires seeking wealth as an end in itself?
So I can't personally vouch for their motives, but I will say you have to be pretty demented to just say, I want wealth, I want more wealth. Well, and again, we're not talking about necessarily billionaires today, but also a lot of them are not hesitant, especially, okay, I know, not trying to bring up any specific examples, but Elon Musk, in investing their money in, pretty risky businesses. Like, he thought at one point he'd have to give up either SpaceX or Tesla because one was going to go down, but he just invested more in it with the thought that he might lose it, but that didn't, So, I think they're not having piles of money and just looking at them and admiring them, so I know.
Thank you, Mr. Point of order, point of information. While it does not specify in the motion that we're talking about the billionaires of today, so there wasn't enough room, I would like the speeches to focus on the billionaires of today. That's what the debate's supposed to be. All right, another open floor speech. Yes, right here.
Here. Michael Ayers. Good to see everyone is having a great time. You may remember me from such hits as Let's Burn the Constitution. Let's use the stock market to steal from said billionaires, and that American conservatives are one, too cowardly and have too much worshipfulness of the military to actually have any kind of resistance to tyranny, so should just give up their guns now. I'm glad to see that Nate Lemansky has taken up the mantle of introducing something new into these debates, so I'll probably retire after this. But I wanted to take perhaps a different approach to this question. Eric Lee is a Chinese entrepreneur. What he's exactly an entrepreneur of is a bit hazy, but he's quoted in an interview saying that the Chinese party state has undergone tremendous change over the last half century. And the interviewer then asks him, do you mean to say that China has ceased to become communist? And he responds, in some ways maybe, but not so in that it's become capitalist, because his definition of capitalist is that the Politburo, or the party, or the state, or the government, or whatever, is subject to the whims of the capital. And from his perspective, in China, the party state, the Politburo, is not able to be subjected to the whims of capital. And maybe a kind of horrific example of this is the case of China's zero COVID policy, where no matter who you were, whether you were in the top 1% of the wealthy class or at the bottom peasant laborer class, you had to avoid COVID no matter what, because it was the dictate of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, here's the interesting thing about that, is I think that that is actually the right tact to take. not in the sense that, of communist control, but that a society that is, can be considered a civilization and that is governed by a system or a hierarchy. We're not talking about like a hunter-gatherer tribe here, like an actual society. It cannot exist in a place where the whims and wishes of capital and those who control it are able to subvert and control the political. If you have this, then you enter into the phase of civilization that's called the looting phase, where there's no longer the intrinsic things that hold the society together on a cultural basis, which anyone who has ever taken a class with Professor Gaston, may he enjoy retirement, knows that culture is not just one's work, but it's also one's folk, their people, their place, their geography, yes, their work as well, but also their ideas, their culture, their religion. All of these things are wrapped up in the society, and the second that people who have exorbitant amounts of wealth are able to control it, then we enter the looting phase. What the looting phase is that individuals see that their highest purpose is to achieve as much wealth and safety for themselves as possible. And once you have this, that society is doomed to collapse. It's historically impossible for that to reverse. At least it's unprecedented, I should say. So, by my interpretation, America is at that point where the whims and wishes of capital and the people who control exorbitant amounts of it are able to do as they wish and are not able to be controlled by the same laws and governance that control, say, you or me. And so the problem is not necessarily that people can't, we want to create a society where people can't accumulate wealth. I don't think that's what anyone's advocating. But the problem really is not with the billionaire, but with the society that promotes the billionaire, or rather the society that allows the billionaire to loot the populace and the government. Multiple studies have shown that the voting demographic, the average person who casts their ballot, and that's pretty much the only political action they take. They don't do a lot of donations, definitely not on the level that billionaires do, that their political wishes have a 0% correlation to actual laws that are passed in government. Whereas multi-billion-dollar corporations, and thusly the people that control them, get pretty much what they want 100% of the time. So, China, bad? Yeah, sure. America, arguably worse.
Thank you. Do we have a question for the speaker? Yes.
Yeah, when you talk about this looting phase that you believe that America is currently entering or in, do you think that this is just in society and history in general a cyclical process that repeats, or do you believe that repeats identically almost, or do you believe that it is a cycle that repeats but grows in the amount of wealth acquired each time as it goes in sort of progression?
I'm so glad you asked. Yes, history is absolutely cyclical. And while, of course, the exact trappings of what happens across various civilizations and societies is, of course, not identical, yes, this is a consistent phase that we see as a large enough civilization that could be considered an empire being defined as a society that has control beyond its established borders. Once generally pretty much all of them do enter a looting phase, and I think that really that's part of just the human condition and the nature of the fall, that anything that any of us humans build is doomed to collapse and fall into dust eventually. So yes.
Thank you, sir. All right, we're now going to move into a 3-minute comment from the presenter from each side. Don't worry, if you still have something to say, we will have the lightning round after this. So, starting with the opposing side this time, Mr. Henry Sanders.
Here.
All right, well, I first want to start by responding to Mr. Lemansky, right? He gives the example of churches, right? If only billionaires did cool stuff with their money, we could support them. Well, let me give you one example, right? We're just on this historical monarch train, so let's go with Justinian, right? When Justinian built the Hagia Sophia, which, in my opinion, is one of the most beautiful buildings in the world, he actually used marble quarried by Egyptian slaves. So just because I appreciate the beauty of the Hagia Sophia doesn't mean that I have to support the enslavement of Coptic Egyptians. And then secondly, to deal with Ms. Cirilla, right? So her point about Solomon is an interesting one. And I'm not opposed to the government having over $1 billion, but right, Solomon's wealth wasn't purely private. It wasn't owned by him as a private individual. It was owned by the government of the Judean state. So he was able to use that for public projects, public works, right? He built a lot of new palaces and synagogues in Jerusalem, so that's something you can see in the Bible. And then to respond to Mr. Ward, right? Mr. Ward seems to conceive of the market as a force for freedom in the world. If only we can have Bush's neoliberal dream of the free market spreading across the world like the coronavirus. That might be, okay. Well, so the market is actually not a force for freedom, and this is why, right? The free market is, in fact, a system that's propped up by governments. It's just like communism in the sense that it doesn't exist naturally like Locke would claim, but rather it exists as a construct created by the government. So, the reason that it's not free, though, is because it allows companies to create artificial needs that you, in fact, don't need, right? So, once a smartphone is created, it enters the populace, and at some point you need it. Like, I need a smartphone because I need to communicate with people, and everyone expects me to have a smartphone to communicate with them. Even though I, as one being, don't ontologically need a smartphone, I still need it because the proliferation of the product and its addictive qualities by these huge companies has actually made it necessary for me to have it. So I'm not free in that sense. And then finally, to deal with Mr. Hennig, right? Mr. Hennig says, well, as long as the wealth is acquired justly. Well, I mean, this point has been beaten to death already. It's pretty clear that no one can name a billionaire who has acquired and dealt with his wealth in a completely just manner. So if your side can come up with one person who's done that, who has no investments in pornography companies or companies that support slavery in China, I'd be happy to hear it, but I haven't heard it yet. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. No question. And now, from the affirming side, Mr. Paul Carl.
I'd like to start you off with, I'm laying all my cards on the table. I can say with 99% certainty there's only been one card-carrying socialist in this room, and that was myself, a proud member of the Bread and Roses Party of the great state of Maryland, which is no longer, it is now a defunct party. But I would like to point you to something I'm wearing. This pin, Kolgar's Ice Cave. Yuri Petrovich Kolgar was an ice cream shop owner in the great city of Yekaterinburg, Soviet Union. And what did Mr. Kolgar do? He built his ice cream shop. He gave the children the ice cream that they wanted. Their parents bought for it. And what did he do? He spread his ice cream company, Kolgar's Ice Cave, throughout many provincial provinces in the Soviet Union. Mr. Kolgar is a prime example of his family's now multi-millionaires, very wealthy because of this ice cave, because of their ability to use their God-given freedom to incentivize, to profit, to make a business, to make money, and to do things which the common good called for. Picture yourself as a young child in the, albeit drag, town of Yekaterinburg, Soviet Union. There's only one ice cream shop. I, as an 8-year-old child, I want ice cream. And who is able to give me that ice cream? Mr. Kolgar from his ice cave. Going on, let's talk about the good the Kolgar family has done. They have a thriving ice cream business in the Siberian wasteland. Anyways, what does this relate to? This relates to very wealthy people who have contributed good to society. The young children out in the frozen wastes of Siberia have a treat to enjoy themselves. And Let's go back to enjoyment. We're not Calvinists here. God loves us. God wants us to enjoy life. God, the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. The ice cream is given to the bad children and the good children alike. Therefore, I posit to you that billionaires can be allowed to exist because they merely saw an opportunity and grasped it. They drank their lives to the dregs, as I encourage all of you to. We are to grab our life and seize it. Make the most of it. And how can we make the most of it? By working hard, by loving God, by giving to the church. Mr. Kolgar was a Russian Orthodox Christian in the Soviet Union, and you all know how the Soviet Union treated Christians. Mr. Kolgar was a shining example of a good apostolic Christian who tried his best and succeeded. Think of all the little children out here among you. Do you not want to have your ice cream on that cold, bleak winter night? I would say you do. And that would not be possible without Kolgar's ice cave. To wrap it up, we can all be Yuri Petrovich Kolgar in any way, in all modes of life, whether it be the industrial waste of Steubenville, Ohio, or the frozen winter wastes of Yekaterinburg, Soviet Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. All right, we will now move into our lightning round, which is 2-minute speeches from the open floor. And we'll start with Mr. Johnson.
I'm Jerry Johnson. Hi. It's hard to follow up the irrefutable Paul Ward, but I will with the most boring speech you'll hear tonight. Because I found, a passion of mine I found as a history major here is I love medieval economics. Guys, it's so very interesting. And we keep bringing it up here and there. Constantine has come up a lot. Close enough. But pre-industrial economics. And it's actually quite important to understand this because the common good. This point keeps coming up. Do billionaires contribute to the common good or not? I think Mr. Lemansky brought up a great point. The qualification, if they do cool stuff. Who judges the cool stuff? Obviously the church, that's great. But we cannot, I think it's a very, multiple people have made this point. We cannot draw this analogy between pre-industrial, wealthy, influential people and today's industrial, wealthy people, because the understanding how that wealth was acquired, who had that much wealth, because you had a much stronger class system than we do now, right? You had kings, you had the aristocracy. This is what the French Revolution overturned. This is what Marxism describes history as. That this is the progress of history, is the classes being destroyed and moving forward until eventually we just get to one uniform class.
30 seconds.
Dang, okay. My point is, this understanding of this pre-industrial understanding of class, if you had this much wealth, I think what Mr. Vanderveer said, it wasn't very popular, but it was true. You are no longer a private citizen when you have that much wealth. Because the nobles who were the billionaires of their day, is what we keep saying. Constantine, the billionaire of his day, it was understood part of his goods had responsibility attached to them. He had to govern the Roman people, right? Defend them. That's what all of his goods were used towards. When you introduce capitalism with the Industrial Revolution, when that takes off, all of a sudden you have this tension that hasn't necessarily been seen before, where you can acquire that level of those goods, without a responsibility to the common good, right? Because you've got to be
Please conclude.
So, I'm not really telling you how to vote, but I'm telling you that this is a really weird position that we're in with the state of things, with wealth. And so, take that into consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Another open floor speech.
Does smell like broken here.
Yes, Dr. Sorella.
Thanks, this is great. So it sounds like, if I understand correctly, that if you could find a billionaire in the current context, post-industrial, who, and by the way, if the motion could be understood like this, to be a billionaire is morally okay. I think that's what it means, right? And the opposing side is it's not morally okay. So what I'm hearing, I think, is this, that it's not okay because nobody acquires their wealth in a morally upright way, and or no one uses it in a morally upright way. The public and private thing's interesting. I don't have a lot of time to address that. I think they're really technically not a public person, because public person is somebody with authority over others in a governmental structure. But aside from that, everybody has a duty to the common good, if that's what you mean. But even poor people do. But here's the thing: if you could find someone who did acquire wealth, you said you were open to this. You'd like to hear if they acquired their wealth morally and use it morally. You'd be open to hear it. I think there are some, I'm not 100% sure, but here are some potential candidates. One is Tom Monahan, who sold Domino's for $1 billion. He was on the board of trustees here for years. And he actually built a nice church in Florida at a university. And then he wanted to build a law school here years ago, but they didn't want it, so he built it in Michigan. Another candidate is potentially St. Catherine Drexel's father, who left his millions. So, but I think proportionally, this is in the 1930s, it may have been equivalent to $1 billion of current U.S. dollars. And she and her sister used that money really, really well to provide schools and care for minority kids in this country. Another example is Carl Anderson, who was the former head of Knights of Columbus, who helped with his billions of dollars to found the John Paul II Institute in Rome, which has now been decimated. But before it was a champion of John Paul II's Veritas splendor. I might be wrong, but I think they're definitely people worth looking at. I think there are others who are Catholic. John Templeton, his foundation promotes religion. I think there's a lot of people. So if what you need are examples, I think there may be some, but even if there aren't, the fact that you say if you can be shown one, you'd be open to it, seems to indicate to me that you don't think it's intrinsically evil to be a billionaire. It's just maybe practically, well, no, look, just maybe practically bad. You know. Another thing to mention that nobody has mentioned is Matthew 19, where Jesus says it's very hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. Not impossible, but very hard. And that has to do with the inordinate attachment to wealth. So,
thank you, Dr. Shaw. We have another open floor speech right there in the back left.
I'd like to begin by saying I've been waiting over there for quite a long time, and you just stole my point. My point was that billionaires are pretty rich men, right? Can we all agree on this? And there's a quote from Jesus that says, "It's easier for a camel to enter the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven." That might mean that you maybe shouldn't be a billionaire, or maybe there's something wrong with it. It's harder to get into heaven. Would you say it's harder for a pagan to get into heaven than a Christian? I think it's a little harder, and I think I shouldn't be a pagan then. So I shouldn't be a billionaire. So why is it harder for billionaires to get, well, rich people, my mistake, to get into heaven? I propose this because, and it's also been brought up, that the means by which they get their wealth is just, you cannot become rich without on your own terms. And I completely forgot my point right now. But basically, you cannot acquire that much money while still acting in the interests of the church or acting in the interests of the common good. Because if I have $1 billion extra, then I'm going far beyond my means, and I don't need that money. And I forgot what I was going to say, so thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, here I am. Oh, Peter, do you have a dollar bill on you? Do you have a dollar bill on you? You do. You got it. You have a $100 bill. 10. Oh my my gosh, thank you very much, Mr. Hennig, #1 philanthropist of the day. Okay, so here I am, a mere philosopher, posing as a financier for a hot second, as these guys are. But these guys are actual financiers a little bit, at least in major, and one who works and is graduated. But here I am today as another mere philosopher, posing as an accountant or a financier, or someone who has any expertise in economics, which I do not. But as a philosopher, I can go upon what I've heard. And I've heard that these $10 here that Mr. Matt Hennig owns is not, in fact, he does not own these $10. This is a promissory note by the U.S. government, which is backed up by funds, some tangible asset that the government has, such as gold, right? Well, at least that's the way it used to work, but now the U.S. government is indeed in $20 trillion in debt. So, in fact, this promissory note goes back to the gold that we do not have, which is indebted to other countries. So that means that billionaires today, do they actually exist? Maybe not, because billionaires all their funds that they have are inherited in the government, and the government is $20 trillion of debt, so they probably do not actually have the funds that they own. What about their intellectual property? Does Elon Musk actually own Tesla? No, he does not, because his IP, the thought that comes from his brain, right, has to be registered with the U.S. government copyright laws in order for his ideas to actually maintain sound effects. So he does not even own his own ideas. So what does this mean? That means that billionaires would not exist without the structure of government as we know it today. What would happen if billionaires actually existed? What would happen to the people who actually had the ideas and actually, oh my gosh, that was 2 minutes. Okay, I talked really quickly too. Okay, so what would happen if you had the billionaires who actually owned their own ideas and actually able to contribute to society instead of it being underlined by a structure of government that, of course, the government can't do anything with their money because they actually own the promissory notes that the government can't take, otherwise we would face a dystopian future with economic collapse. But what would happen if we had people who actually owned what they produced and could billionaires theoretically exist? Maybe, because they do exist in theory now, but not practically. What happens if billionaires could practically exist? God only knows. We'll find out in the near future. Maybe, maybe not. Enter a post-nuclear apocalyptic dystopian future, which hopefully will not happen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Right here.
Okay, so I actually just wanted to say some similar things to Dr. Cirilla. I think 2 points against the motion have been asserted as kind of pseudo-obvious, and I don't think they are at all. That's one, that $1 billion could not be amassed in a just way. And two, that it is intrinsically unjust to have $1 billion and that it can never be used in a just way. Okay. I don't necessarily think that either of those things are true. I think that because of the way that the economy is structured, someone could, make $1 billion like that, and not necessarily in an unjust way. Say I write a code that could make self-driving cars virtually incrashable. Well, maybe Elon Musk, who has $200 billion, wants to spare some pocket cash of $1 billion and buy the code from me. Well, I don't see anything wrong with that. I just saved a whole bunch of lives. All right, well, so I think that's possible. And then the second point is that $1 billion could not be used in a just way. Dr. Cirilla used the example of Tom Monahan. My mom worked directly under Tom Monahan for 20 years, and he was a pretty holy guy. And he did actually give away 99% of his wealth, which admittedly, ironically, would not make him a billionaire. That's your right. Okay, but I do think also too that there's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be intrinsically wrong to use $1 billion, because $1 billion could be, invested in owning entities of smaller businesses, which offsets the monopolies of the larger businesses, while still remaining your assets, your entity, and still possibly even amassing wealth, not being a stupid idea. And so that's all. I think
Do we have another open question?
Point of clarification or not? Can you take a point of clarification?
Yes.
Last 30 seconds. I think you thought you were opposing it, but actually I agree with those points.
Let's agree.
Oh, he understood.
He agreed with you.
All right.
Yes, Dr. Plato.
I don't have any amazing speech or anything. I think if the motion is understood the way Dr. Cirilla meant, which is it morally permissible to be a billionaire, then I think this is a dumb debate. right? But if I think the debate is about the conditions of society, whether they're just or Christian, that's what the debate's about, and whether we would have the particular kind of balance of billionaires and elites that we have right now, right, and the moral influence they have that's baneful, right, would we have that kind of an elite, that kind of an excessive wealth, if we had a just society or a Christian society on the ground? So then the debate seems to be underneath that really is important to me, it would make a really fascinating debate, is whether if those conditions attained, right, of a just society or a Christian society, we would have the kind of misbalance of power in the elites and the billionaire class. Whether there could be an individual or not, I don't care, that made it right or is moral, I don't care, right? But to me, the interesting debate would be about the conditions underneath of a society and its relationship to this kind of class of people with wealth. And it seemed like this was the way this side wanted to interpret the issue, and it seemed like the other side wanted to interpret it in a way that would make the debate dumb. So, I don't know how you're going to interpret it, but if it's just whether or not a single billionaire can be, is it morally permissible for him to get there somewhere? Whatever, I don't care.
Yes, Ms. Cirilla, the older.
Cirilla number 3. Okay, so if you agree with this motion that the House believes that billionaires should not be allowed to exist, you're basically if you didn't disagree with the motion, my bad, excuse me, that billionaires should not be allowed to exist. If you oppose this motion, you're basically saying that we should implement a system that controls how much wealth you are allowed or not allowed to have. That's what kind of sounds like communism. So the big problem that we're looking at is not, firstly, it's not that we are in a bad system. It's not that you morally are not allowed to own $1 billion or above. The problem that we're looking at is that we are living in a society that is extremely immoral, that allows awful things to be done with money, and the solution is not to restrict the amount of money, because no matter how much restricting you do, that's not really going to change the money flow, because somebody's going to be in control in the end. And what we really need to fix is we need to evangelize and become a Christian society. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Right there in the right corner.
I like green tea, I like black tea, and I like iced tea. But most of all, I like liberty. Oh my God. Can I see those $10, please? Alright, thanks. That's what the government does. Alright, but let's run it back a bit, right? Today's Sunday reading on the Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek, blessed are the lowly, right? Not only do I affirm this motion, but I believe that we should be grateful to billionaires. Think about it, right? They have lots of money. That means we don't. That is allowing us to live the life of Christ. Was Christ born as a king, or was he born as a pauper? We are able to unite our redemptive suffering to the passion of Christ. This suffering has been given meaning by the life and passion of Christ. So when we live in poverty, when we appreciate that and unite that to the sufferings of Christ, we are able to truly transform this world. How is transformation done, right? Through sacrifice and through prayer. That is the meaning of redemptive suffering of the Christian life. So many have spoken about how it's the conditions of society that is bad, that is not helping the common good. But these billionaires, they allow us to change that, not through necessarily worldly action, but through our interior change first. And that is how we live a beautiful, good life, my dear brothers and sisters. Thank you.
No stealing. Right here in the back.
Thank you. Jacob
Please
Hall.
state your name.
Jacob Halls. It's my first time here, and this has been a blast, so I appreciate it. I'm going to be pedantic, and I apologize. It's not as fun to listen to. I think the proposition is that billionaires should be allowed to exist. To deny that, you have to say they shouldn't allow to exist. And obviously, practically, you have to say that there must be some mechanism by which billionaires are either prevented from existing or cease to exist. And what has oftentimes been proposed, what's oftentimes been proposed is that the state has the power to do this. And of course, what happens is certain circumstances that I think actually go against what y'all are trying to argue. I'm very sympathetic to y'all's point. Y'all say that capitalism is often anti-family. It's kind of destroyed the basis of a good family structure. I can't think of any more system opposed to the family than communism. I can't think of any system or ideology that has led to abortion, that has led to a gross kind of feminism that destroys the natural foundation of the family. That all goes back to the Communist Manifesto, that all goes back to Proudhon and all the utopian socialists. The other point about working conditions, I don't need to remind you that the working conditions in, say, for example, China are so terrible that they have suicide nets. I'm not aware of any place here where that is the case. And the second point was that it is also against our human dignity. Again, just to think about what went on in the Spanish Civil War, just think about what went on in Latin America with the guerrillas, to think about what happened in Russia, and China, and Vietnam. Tens of millions of people perished. People were denied the right to religion, people were denied the right to own basic necessities. And so what I want to say is that the very things that are motivating y'all's contentions, I think, go against your point. And that if we are going to judge based on the proposition, then I think it's clear billionaires should be allowed to exist. You're here! Should they give that money away? Of course. But the question is, should they be allowed to exist? And to say that they shouldn't means giving all that power to a state, and you're left with just billionaires except in red colors. So.
Thank you. We're going to have one more open floor speech. Ms. Clarion.
Guys, I'm here to urge you all to abstain because we don't know what we're debating. Like, if you live in a Christian society, although I don't understand economics at all, I hate economics, but if you live in a Christian society, then of course, morally, like the angelic councils has never been to be a billionaire. But to say they're not allowed to exist, I mean, what you're gonna do, go hang them all? Like, that's pathetic. In our society today, practically, I feel like unless you're in a Christian society, you inevitably either go towards capitalism or communism. You cannot have a society built on distributism, which is the just thing, without having a Catholic culture. I am all for building a distributism society, but before that you need to build a Catholic culture, and then come back to the question. You have to think Thomas More's utopia, where there's no billionaires there, but as I argued with my honors class, you can't, like, that's a religious community. That's why there's no billionaires in a Franciscan religious community. But if you want to all go be nuns and friars, that's great. I'm all supporting that. But first, before you can say billionaires can't exist, you need to build a Catholic culture again. You need to get rid of the gospel of wealth. But then I also just wanted to bring up, against an earlier point, your point, Mr. Sanders, about Solomon. I don't think Solomon was using his wealth for the common good. That's just my opinion as like a history major. His palace was bigger than the temple. Really? So I'm just saying. But then Catherine Drexel obviously used her wealth for the common good. So I don't really know what we're arguing here, because it seems like you can beat the stick either way with this motion, because I can say we're arguing whether it's morally permissible or whether if we lived in a Catholic culture it's okay. Therefore, I urge you all to abstain.
Thank you. All right, we're now going to move into our concluding speeches, one from each side, and we will start with the affirming side, I guess. Mr. Hennig.
Thank God it's over, am I right?
Look, I'm extremely sympathetic to the opposing side. I really understand your arguments. I'm not saying billionaires are necessarily a good thing. And honestly, I don't know much about the billionaires of today, which is why I'm extremely glad that Dr. Cirillo got up and spoke, because I had no idea who those people were, right? But essentially, I've heard a lot about culture, and I agree. I'm not saying our culture and our economic system is the best one. I'm not saying this capitalist system is the best thing that we can have for human dignity. Okay? But that's not what this debate is about. I'm sorry. I would like it to be. I really would. But it's not. It's whether or not billionaires should be allowed to exist. And it's a very important distinction. Because whether or not billionaires should exist is about culture. Should they be allowed to exist is about moral ethics. About private property, because as soon as you start imposing state restrictions, because let's be honest, there's no other means to impose this, not allowing billionaires to exist without state restrictions, all of a sudden you're opening up to everybody. Who has the right to the private property? Who has the right to own what they justly acquired? I'm not talking about, again, Hugh Hefner. He didn't have a right to that money because it was unjustly acquired and he used it unjustly. Okay? And I'd like to finish with the quote from Pope what's his name? Leo XIII. Okay. It's a matter of charity, not justice. That's what he said. It's a matter that the rich give what is excess of charity, but it is not justice that the rich give. It's a matter of depending upon their moral soul. But it's not a matter for the state, it's not a matter for us to dictate, it's not a matter for anybody to say, you have too much. And that's what this debate is about. 1 minute. That's my core point. It's not about culture. It's about whether or not they're allowed to acquire money justly. And I'm not speaking about billionaires today, because again, I don't know much about them. If it was about that, if it was worded differently, I would have done my research differently. It's about the moral theology, it's about the philosophy of it, and it's about the ethics of acquiring money in a certain means that allows you to keep this money with your assets that technically make you a billionaire. And we can't say they can't exist. As Catholics, under the Holy Catholic Church, and under the basic principles of human rights, I urge you to vote yes for this motion, that they should be allowed to exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hennig. And now for our final speech for the night from the opposing side, Mr. Denley.
Thank you. 2 hours is too short a time among such excellent hobbits. This has been a wonderful debate, and thank you for all the wonderful speeches. It reminds me, after Reverend Navarro was published, New St. Patrick's was being built in New York, and Rockefeller was not happy. He really did not like Catholics, the Italians, the Irish, and it was being built right across from Rockefeller Plaza, and so he commissioned Atlas, this Atlas holding the universe on his back, this statue that's still there in Rockefeller Plaza, across from it. And the Cardinal Archbishop, in reply, put the icon of Jesus, the infinite pride, up on the facade, contrary to the Atlas, right? The church is now in this situation that she finds herself with these excesses of wealth, and the papal encyclicals are addressing that to us. And the call then is for us to approach it with faith, and then ultimately with hope. You know, people talk about what do we do about this. Pope Benedict, of happy memory, wrote about this in Caritatis and Veritas, where he talked about the gift economy as opposed to this economy where it's continuous accumulations of wealth. And this gift economy then reclaims the orientation of money and labor and work back to the common good, like we're discussing. Many speeches brought up how billionaires really aren't contributing to this common good, and it is kind of this growing sense that we have of this. And so it's the call of the Pope to reconceive of how we're thinking of property, how we're thinking of labor. Labor is a glorification of man. And billionaires, as the system that they exist within, is not glorifying labor. It's not glorifying work. It's not leading man to his ultimate ends. As Dr. Cirillo pointed out, these examples of these just billionaires is when they cease to become billionaires. When they realize this ill-gotten wealth is brought back. It's brought back to the common good.
And so I would urge you to oppose the motion, to be with Pope Benedict in trying to build a gift-giving economy, trying to rebuild structures of community and the family, solidarity, the worker. We're aligning ourselves with the tradition. As Augustine said, the superfluous excess of the wealthy is the necessity of the poor. Let's reclaim this idea of the universal destination of goods, the preferential option of the poor. You cannot worship God and mammon, and let's return to this gift-giving economy that Pope Benedict is pointing us to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Denley. All right, before we conduct our vote, just remember that you're voting on which side presented their arguments most convincingly. All right, now everyone who affirms the motion, this House believes that billionaires should be allowed to exist. Please stand and raise your hand. All right, you may be seated. If you oppose the motion, please stand and raise your hand. Please be seated. And if you abstain, please stand.
Impeach him!
All right, with a count of 56 to 21 and 4 abstaining, the motion is passed.